Most turning points in history are only recognized after they've already happened. Nobody boarding this flight expected to become part of a story that would reshape the way that the world thought about civilian aviation. They believed they were simply traveling to another city, following a familiar route that countless passengers had taken before. But by the end of the morning, governments would be protesting, newspapers around the world would be asking difficult questions, and an ordinary commercial flight would become the first recorded civilian airliner deliberately shot down by hostile military aircraft. Join me today as I uncover the remarkable and terribly sad story of the Kweilin and the ordinary people whose routine journey became one of aviation's darkest firsts. The morning of August 24th, 1938, began without any kind of obvious warning signs. There's no storm clouds on the horizon, nothing like that. The Douglas DC-2, named Kweilin, departed Hong Kong at 8:04 a.m., carrying 14 passengers and 4 crew members on a scheduled civilian flight toward Wuzhou before continuing farther into China. The aircraft belonged to the China National Aviation Corporation, one of China's earliest commercial airlines, but it was flown by an American pilot named Hugh Leslie Woods under Pan American management. That was nothing unusual about this at the time, and there was nothing really unusual about the passenger list. There were business people and families and airline crew members and travelers simply trying to reach their next destination. Commercial aviation was still in its infancy. It was still young enough that every successful journey just kind of was building the confidence in the future of air travel. For everyone aboard, this appeared to be yet another ordinary morning. About 26 minutes after takeoff, that ordinary morning completely disappeared. Soon after crossing into Chinese airspace, Woods spotted 8 Japanese military aircraft approaching in what looked very much like an attack formation. Keep in mind what year this is, 1938. He understood immediately that something was very, very wrong. The Kweilin carried no weapons and had no way to defend itself. It was a passenger airliner. Woods turned toward cloud cover, hoping to disappear long enough to be able to escape. I'm sure that had to be absolutely terrifying and frightening for the passengers. When that failed, though, he searched desperately for somewhere, anywhere safe to land. By the farmland below, it was divided by rice paddies and narrow dikes that made an emergency landing pretty much nearly impossible for him. But then he noticed a river. This was definitely not an ideal solution, but it was the only one that he had. With remarkable amounts of skill, Pilot Woods brought the aircraft down onto the water so gently that no one was injured during the landing. For a brief moment, there was reason to believe that everyone might survive. But a foreshadowing there, I'm sorry. That hope lasted only minutes. The aircraft had been designed to float temporarily, but the current was carrying it downstream until it became visible to the Japanese again. Woods soon realized something else that made the situation even more difficult, though. He was the only person aboard who knew how to swim. Spotting an abandoned boat along the riverbank, he entered the water and fought the current selflessly in an attempt to reach it so that he could return and help everyone else that was on the boat, on the plane. The attacks continued overhead while he was struggling on the shore. When he finally reached land and looked back, the floating airliner had drifted farther away and was beginning to disappear beneath the water. It was sinking quickly. By the time the aircraft was no longer visible, only 3 people survived. History happens in moments like these, when a routine day becomes divided forever into before and after. As governments reacted and newspapers filled with reports of this unprecedented attack, another possibility quietly emerged behind the scenes. Some investigators began to ask whether the Kweilin had actually been the intended target at all. It was an unsettling question, and the answer, if true, would make the tragedy even more heartbreaking. At the center of that mystery stood the one passenger who no one on board the flight really knew. One name that appeared on the wrong travel plans. One decision that may have sealed the fate of everyone else on board. The answer to that mystery may never be known with complete certainty, but it has echoed through history ever since. Chinese leader Sun Yat-sen, the only son of Sun Yat-sen, had been expected to travel aboard the Kweilin that morning. Instead, he boarded an earlier flight operated by another airline entirely. Some later believed that a secretary had mistakenly announced the wrong flight, while others wondered whether the incorrect announcement had been made deliberately to protect him. Whatever the truth was, many investigators came to believe that the Kweilin may have been indeed attacked because the passengers were thought to include this man who was never even there to begin with. The Japanese government denied intentionally attacking a civilian airliner, saying that the aircraft had behaved suspiciously, while the Japanese newspaper acknowledged that Sun Yat had been the intended objective and claimed that he had been meant to be captured alive. These conflicting accounts left behind questions that were stacked up, and they had never disappeared. If the intended passenger was on another aircraft, then everyone aboard the Kweilin became victims of a mistake that could never be corrected. The tragedy reached far beyond the passenger list, too. Among those who lost their lives were three of China's most respected banking executives, men whose experience was desperately needed during this time. It was an already difficult period for their country. Their deaths created serious challenges for China's financial system at the time when stability was hard to maintain. Around the world, the attack dominated headlines because no one had ever witnessed anything quite like it. Newsreels played it to pack theaters in Hong Kong. They were allowing audiences to hear Hugh Leslie Woods, the pilot, describe the events in his own words. In the United States, public opinion shifted further against Japan's conduct during the war in China, although sympathy stopped short of immediate military action. Sometimes history changes public opinion long before it changes government policy. Airlines also understood that they could no longer assume civilian aircraft would be left alone during wartime. China National Aviation Corporation, CNAC, and other carriers increasingly shifted important routes to nighttime operations, relying on new German-developed Lorenz radio navigation technology that allowed pilots to follow radio beacons through darkness instead of relying solely on daylight navigation. It was an important step toward protecting passengers, but it also reflected a painful reality. Commercial aviation had crossed an invisible line again. If you weren't here, at one point last month, I covered what was the very first bombing of a commercial aircraft. It also happened in China. The skies had become another battlefield. Whether civilian travelers accepted this fact or not, this was the new reality. But then came one final twist that almost sounds impossible. Workers recovered the Kweilin from the river. They repaired it. They returned it to service under a different name. And the Chongqing was its new name. Its former identity was retired because many passengers would understandably hesitate to board an aircraft connected with such a well-known tragedy. For 2 more years, it flew again, carrying passengers who often had no idea they were traveling aboard the rebuilt survivor of history's first recorded civilian airliner that was shot down by hostile aircraft. Then in October of 1940, after landing in an airfield in Yunnan, the Chongqing came under another Japanese attack. American pilot Walter Foxy Kent was killed immediately, along with 8 others aboard. This time, the aircraft was destroyed completely. One airplane had somehow survived one historic disaster, only to become part of another one and destroyed as a result. Today, the Kweilin incident is remembered because it marked a turning point that few people saw coming. Before August 24th of 1938, the idea of deliberately attacking a civilian passenger aircraft was unthinkable. Afterward, governments and airlines and travelers all had to confront the reality that would shape aviation for generations. Modern air travel is built not only on engineering and innovation, but also on these very difficult lessons learned through painful experiences. Some events change the world quietly, while others do it with one single unforgettable morning. This one did both, reminding us that the safest journey can become the one history remembers the most. Even clear skies cannot guarantee a peaceful horizon, and that's a serious altitude to measure. And for those of you wondering why I so often cover airline investigations and crashes like this, I was a flight attendant for some time back when I was in my 30s. I loved the job, but what inspired me to do it was that when I was being trafficked, I was in another country. I was in Scotland. And I would watch air crash investigations because it was one of the few ways that I could hear the American accent other than Law and Order. And being around this all the time and so watching air crash investigations, I learned so much about these kinds of disasters and how they changed aviation and how they inspired other people to do other things. And when I watched Sullenberger land his plane on the Hudson, and I heard the flight attendants themselves talk about how they got people out of the plane, I knew that was what I wanted to do. So I went and did it for a little while. And I say that like it's so flippant and easy and simple to do. It is not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I've done a lot of hard things in my time. That one was a challenge, but it was one that I was definitely willing to step up to the plate for. I loved every minute of my job, and I saw some crazy stuff. I experienced some wild adventures. Never did I experience any kind of air crash or anything like that. Came close. Never did. Thank you for watching.